Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's time to start working again. It's time to start working again. No, está bien ahí. Sí, pero se puede cerrar eso. Me gusta verlo cerrado. Okay. So we switch to English. No se puede abrir las ventanas. ¿Qué pasa si abrimos? No lo veo el aire acondicionado. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We go on with the analysis of the international environment. During our first session in the morning, we were analyzing the American continent. Our target is to analyze the whole world by continents and to see more or less what are the problems that the different continents have today. So now in the afternoon we will switch to the Asian continent and we will see exactly what are the problems that we have and how to do business in those continents. What are the plus, the minus, the strengths, the weaknesses. I told you today in the morning which were the main aspect of the American continent: North America and Central America and South America. And now we will switch to the Asian continent. Of course, here we have to consider the importance of some countries. We have several countries there, but mainly we refer to China, India, and Japan. Those three countries, they have a concrete impact, a big impact in the general economy. But not only those countries. Of course, I will go through social and cultural aspect, political and military aspect too, and we will see what are the relevant issues on this. Okay? Now, here you have a map of Asia. First of all, which is the biggest country we see on the top is Russia. As you can see, Russia is the biggest country we have, goes from the western part to the eastern part. Is Russia also part of Europe, in your opinion? Yes or no? Are you sure? Olga says no. Olga is from Russia. She says no.
Not as a whole.
Jose Victor, not as a whole. Maybe Ruben is reopening the question, maybe. Nereo is reopening the issue, maybe. And what is Angie thinking?
No.
No, absolutely no. No way to include Russia in Europe. But there was a Russian leader, a Soviet leader. I mentioned Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev today in the morning, the last president of Soviet Union. And he made an important speech in front of the European Parliament in 1989. And he referred to our common home between the Atlantic Ocean and the Ural Mountain. Where are the Ural Mountains? Ural Mountains, they are here. Yekaterinburg. Here we have Ural Mountains. So the part of Russia which is on the west of the Ural Mountain could be included in Europe. Do you agree? Maybe. How can we decide if a part of the country is Europe or not? Do we have a scientific method? We don't, but we refer to culture. Maybe the right to belong to a continent or to another continent comes from the culture, from the tradition, from the different aspects that made possible for that country to interact with the continent. So the history of Russian Empire is deeply connected with the history of many European monarchies. We had the Romanov in Russia before the revolution of 1917. Several centuries of Romanov, from Peter the Great to Alexander II, passing through Catherine the Great, and before Ivan the Terrible, and so on. So we had the several Tsars, and those Tsars, they were linked with the European monarchies. So, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot exclude that part of Russia has also a European dimension. We do not have to exclude this, Olga. But of course, the biggest part of Russia is in Asia. But some people, they also say the less important part of Russia is in Asia, because Moscow, St. Petersburg are on this side of Russia, and they are closer to Europe and to European affairs. Nevertheless, Russia is on the top. Then we have a biggest part of China. When we say China, how many China do we have? One or two? Beatriz?
How many China?
Yeah. In general, you think just one China. Do you agree? And what is Taiwan? Taiwan? Have you heard about Taiwan?
It's separate entity.
Separate entity, but it's part of People's Republic of China? Yes? No? Now you're leaving to go to China. When you say China, People's Republic of China. But there is also Taiwan Republic of China. Those people in Taiwan, they are Chinese. They are not recognized as independent country by the people in China, in People's Republic of China. Now we will see the history, why we have now today two sorts of China. A smaller one and the bigger one. And then we have India, another big country. Here we have Japan. Japan is not a very extended country. The density of population in Japan is very high. We have more than 100 people living in Japan. In India we have 1.2 billion inhabitants. In China 1.3 billion inhabitants. We have a lot of people living in Asia, ladies and gentlemen. And then we have other big countries such as Kazakhstan. That is a former Soviet republic. It was part of Soviet Union before, together with many other countries here. Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. And then we have other Soviet republics, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia. Then we have another big country which is Mongolia. Have you heard about Mongolia? Yes. Then here we have Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan. And here we have southeastern part of Asia. Burma, Thailand. We will have one group studying Thailand, Bangkok, then Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines. We have several countries. Now we will try to analyze this space and we'll draw some consideration. First of all, I start with the general organization. Do we have local organizations? Yes, we do. Apart from the big international organization which is called United Nations, we have regional organizations. We already analyzed the American regional organizations. Now we go to analyze other regional organizations in Asia. One of those organizations is ASEM. This is not really an organization, this is a meeting. ASEM is Asia-Europe meeting. When I say Europe, do I refer to what? European Union. Pay attention. Very often we have some mistakes. When we say Europe, we think about EU, but Europe is more than EU. EU is less than Europe. Not all the European countries are members of EU. We mentioned Switzerland, for instance. We will have a group studying Switzerland in these days. And Switzerland is not a member of EU, but Switzerland, of course, is part of Europe, as many other countries that are not members of EU. So here we have a meeting between European Union and Asia. And this is an informal dialogue that started in 1996, which is the aim of this meeting. This is a regular meeting between EU and Asia. We have a regular meeting to increase mutual understanding, to strengthen the relationship. And what is really important is in a spirit of mutual respect and equal partnership. What does it mean, ladies and gentlemen? Mutual respect and equal partnership. Elsa. Mutual respect?
You have to respect other countries.
Yes, but why they wanted to mention mutual respect?
Because of the difference in the culture.
There are differences in the culture, and what are the Chinese saying? The Chinese very often, they feel under pressure. Mutual respect means that the Chinese say to the Europeans, please do not attack us with the human rights, with democracy and all those issues that you raise very often. Just respect us. We are socialists. We have a socialist regime. We cannot have the same standard that you have in European Union. You cannot export the same models and standards that you have in European Union in China. China is a different country. We are 1.3 billion inhabitants. We need different tools to administer the society. So please do not raise the issue of human rights, democracy very often. We are here also to make business together. Let's think about the common goals and the equal partnership. Even though we are not democratic, even though we are not open market, total open market economy, even though China is nowadays an open market economy, as you know, we can have an equal partnership. And this is what we really would like to have. So mutual respect. We have the 27 countries of EU. You know that nowadays we have 27 countries in EU, plus 16 Asian countries. And here you have the list. So you have all the countries that we were analyzing before. And this is a dialogue to do more. Mainly, this dialogue has economic impact. We do not push too much on the political level. We push more on the economic level. We would like to provide meetings for business. Asia is considered to be a fantastic market. Some of the countries of Asia are considered to be strategic countries for EU. China, India, mainly. But then we have more countries growing there. So the European countries are trying to have more interaction with Asia. And this is a regular meeting to increase the relationship. And then we have another one. For instance, we have ASEAN. ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It's quite old. 1967, several years ago. And we had a group of Southeastern Asian countries that decided to be together, which was the need of this. Well, probably you remember that in the 50s, in Bandung, you know where is Bandung? Where is Bandung? Bandung. Can you find here Bandung somewhere? Here you have, close to Jakarta, Bandung, few kilometers far from Jakarta, in Indonesia. What happened in Bandung in 1955? A big conference. Why this conference is now very important for the historians? Because in this conference they prepared the first step to create a new movement, the non-aligned countries movement. Have you heard about the non-aligned countries movement? Never heard about? Non-aligned. What does it mean? Non-aligned movement. Non-aligned movement after 1947, one group will study India. This group will make an historical introduction. When India became independent? 1947, correct. 1947, the British Parliament adopted the Indian Act, and India became independent from the British Empire. And afterwards, behind India, we had many other countries that became independent, both in the African environment and in the Asian environment. And those countries, of course, exploited the new trend. So we had a decolonization movement. Countries became independent. And so those countries, what did they have in front of them? They had a world in which we had the two big superpowers, United States of America on one side, Soviet Union on the other side. So we had communism on one side, democracy and capitalism on the other side. And so they had to select, to decide, where shall we set up our country? Which will be the position of this country? Shall we be more on the communist side or on the democratic and liberal side? In Bandung in 1955, the countries, the new independent countries, they started to meet. They say, why don't we create a third pole? We don't want to stay with the United States, and we don't want to stay with Soviet Union. We want to create a third pole. And some of the leaders, Nehru, Nasser, Nehru, India, Nasser, Egypt, Sukarno, Indonesia, Tito, Yugoslavia. And Tito was the leader that then hosted in Belgrade in 1961 the fundamental conferences that established the non-aligned movement. So those countries here, they were part of the non-aligned movement, and in 1967 they also decided to provide regional integration. Regional integration to do what? To accelerate economic growth, social progress and cultural development, to promote peace, stability, to respect justice and the rule of law, in harmony with the United Nations Charter. So they started with the regional integration. We have some members here, you have the members, and nowadays, as you can see, they have a population of 500 million inhabitants, which is considerable. And of course, a product and a total trade which is also not irrelevant. Those countries are also looking at EU as a model of regional integration process. They would like to create also a regional and economic cooperation. The idea is always the same: establish a common market. The idea is, in one side, to go beyond the political borders in order to weaken those borders, in order to progressively eliminate those borders, in order to make possible for the goods and services to pass, in order to strengthen the international trade. The people, they consider that prosperity comes from trade. Trade is the pillar of prosperity. So if national trade has limits, you have to enhance trade with international trade. And you have to promote this with political rules that may weaken the borders and create new common market space area. we have another organization, SCO. What is SCO? It is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This is an extremely interesting organization, ladies and gentlemen. You will go to Shanghai in 3 weeks, right, Carolina? Right, Elsa? Less than 3 weeks, Elsa. 19 days is less than 3 weeks. Very good. So when you be in Shanghai, you will maybe also remember that there was the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that was also created in the middle of the 90s after the collapse of Soviet Union. And this is an organization of Central Asia. Among 5 former Soviet republics, Russia is the biggest one. Then we have Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and then afterwards also Uzbekistan joined. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 former Soviet republics, plus China. And why this organization is interesting? It is interesting because we have a deeper cooperation between Russia and China. And why we have now a deeper cooperation between Russia and China? Did we always have good cooperation between Russia and China? No? Yes? Elvira? No idea. Pardon? They were communists, but this is the interesting point. They were both communists, true. But there was not love story. Even though in the beginning they started very well, as lovers. Why they started as lovers? Because they started as lovers, because we had the revolution in China. Have you heard about the long march of Mao Zedong? Mao Zedong was the leader of the Communist Party in China. Well, so we had a Republic of China before. Since 1911, Sun Yat-sen, the leader of Kuomintang, which is the National Party of China, established the Republic. After several issues in the 20s, in the 30s, then we started to have problems. This Kuomintang party could not manage to keep the country united, also because there were many international interferences in China. So in the 30s, we started to have a very serious problem. This is today still a very serious problem, the presence of Japan. Have you heard about the imperialism of Japan? Japan in the second half of the 19th century had a big bond, a big, I would say, a progress. It was called the Meiji time. During the Meiji time there was the modernization of Japan. Even though Japan is a very traditional society based on old values and principles, we have the different levels of the society that are still today highly considered in Japan. So Japan grew up in the second half of the 19th century. In the first half of the 20th century, Japan had to expand. Now there was a problem. Japan started to expand in Asia by invading part of Asia. If we want to go and see the expansion of Japan, we have to see the map. And in the map we will see which was the slower expansion of Japan. In the beginning of the century, Korea, and then they started to go to Manchuria, Shantung, Fujian, Formosa, Taiwan. That was the natural space of expansion of Japan. And that was not well considered, of course, in China. But then, even more, because in the 20s. Angie is American. She will remind us that after First World War, the United States that won the war, they changed policy. Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States that decided to enter First World War, and also gave to the peace treaties a strong impact by proposing to establish a new international organization called the League of Nations, then he lost the elections. So the Democratic Party gave the power to the Republican Party. And the following presidents, Harding, Hoover, Coleridge, they decided to go back to isolationism. Isolationism means that the United States, they would follow the Monroe Doctrine since 1823. They would take care about the American affairs and not about non-American affairs. So they went back also to protectionism in the 20s. New tariffs. Those tariffs were also responsible of the big crack of the stock exchange in New York in 1929. But one also of the international consequences was the fact that Japan said that they could not expand their trade in America because the American market was closed and protected. So they had to find the new opportunities in Asia. And then we started with the Japanese imperialism. And even, it was even worse in the 30s when the Japanese created a new state in Manchuria called Manchukuo. There's another interesting movie that you can see. It is The Last Emperor that I suggest to you. It's the reconstruction of the history in China. And you see when in the 30s the Japanese that were controlling Korea, they went to Manchuria, they were already in Manchuria, they established a new protectorate in Manchuria called Manchukuo, and they expanded their presence in Beijing, Nanking, Shanghai, all the coast, Canton. And even during Second World War, the Japanese entered the former French colonies in Indochina. So there was a big movement of Japan there. And that is why at that moment there was a reaction in China, and Mao Zedong organized the Communist Party, and they started to fight both against the Japanese and against the nationalists of China, because the nationalists of China of the Kuomintang, they were supporting the Western countries. So then we had Second World War, and Second World War was the big collapse of Japan. After the biggest expansion of Japan, as you can see in Southeast Asia, going from Manchukuo, this part of China, all, more or less all the biggest town on the coast of China, Indochina, Burma, Siam, Indonesia, you can see how big was the control of the Japanese before and during Second World War. And then after that we had the war. Why we had the war? Have you heard about Pearl Harbor? What happened on December the 7th of 1941? The Japanese, they decide to strike. Here, Pearl Harbor is Hawaii. Hawaii, this belongs to the United States. Here we had part of the American fleet. They destroyed the fleet. Why we had Pearl Harbor? Well, we had Pearl Harbor because the Roosevelt administration, even though Roosevelt was even isolationism, they changed progressively from isolationism to the intervention in Second World War. Why they decided to intervene? They decided to intervene because they wanted to to face the growing Japanese imperialism there. So slowly the American administration started to send some letters to the Japanese. You have to remove your troops from Southeastern Asia. The Japanese said no. The Americans said, yes, you must remove your troops from there. The Japanese said, okay, we will do it, but in 99 years. The Americans said, no, now. The third answer was, okay, we will do it, but in 25 years. The last letter of Cordell Hull was, no, you must do it now, otherwise we will take action. And the Japanese considered that as a declaration of war. And they went to Pearl Harbor. That was a war. And so we had the war, and then in 1942 the American troops started to have first victories versus Japan until the collapse of Japan of 1945. Question?
Why did the Americans send those letters to Japan? Were they scared about what Japan was doing? Or?
Yes, they wanted, of course, first of all, Japan was allied with Germany and Italy, with Hitler and Mussolini, and they were fearing that there was too big expansion of Japan in Southeastern Asia. Also because the Americans, they had interest here. And also they were threatening Australia, which was part of the British Empire. Did you see the movie, and the third movie, Australia? Do you remember the Japanese attack in Darwin? Darwin is here. So they took the example of Second World War. And so the Americans at that moment, they wanted to, not to control, but to balance the growing expansion of Japan in Southeastern Asia. And finally, there was a war. And Japan collapsed, 1945. I don't go through all the events, you know, the nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the unconditional surrender signed by the Emperor of Japan in 1945. In the same moment, in China, there was the Long March of Mao. And this Long March took 10 years, from 1939 to 1949. 10 years to win a civil war. And then what happened afterwards? And then, after the Long March of Mao Zedong, we have the proclamation of the People's Republic of China. People's Republic of China, here. But the other China, the one with the Kuomintang party, went to Taiwan. And here they kept the Nationalist Republic of China. So we had two China, a smaller one and a bigger one. But which was the problem at that moment? That China, the smaller one, was recognized as official China at the United Nations. Because the Western countries, they wanted to have this China. This China was allied of the Western country. This China was an enemy, was communist. So in 1949, Beijing signed a very important agreement with Moscow, with Soviet Union. I call it the Lovers' Agreement because they signed it on the Valentine Day, the 14th of February, 1950. On the Valentine Day, they signed an agreement of friendship and economic cooperation. And so, as Ruben was saying before, they are both communist countries, they should cooperate together. They started to cooperate, 1950. But then in the 50s, it didn't work. It didn't work. The Kremlin and Soviet Union, they wanted to be the center of communism. So as they did with Central and Eastern Europe, they wanted to have links with all the communist parties, and they wanted to decide in Moscow the strategy. Some countries did not follow. Yugoslavia did not follow. Tito, who was communist, interrupted relations with Stalin. And they said, we will have our own way towards socialism. The same was Mao. Mao, late in the 50s, they started to say goodbye Soviet Union. Also because the Chinese, they wanted to have some help from Soviet Union concerning, for instance, the construction of nuclear weapons. The Soviet, they had nuclear weapons since 1949. The Chinese also wanted to have, but the Soviets answered, niet. So they felt bad, the Chinese. And Mao published the Red Book, and this was the Maoism, the Mao way towards socialism. So we did not have easy relationship between China and Soviet Union. And the United States, in the beginning of the 70s, they decided to establish relations with the People's Republic of China in order to avoid a potential link between Moscow and Beijing. They sent the ping pong team to Beijing in 1972. That was an excellent move from the psychological point of view. You know, the Chinese, they are the best of the world in ping pong. And so it's a way to establish a dialogue. Even though you do not speak the language, I can assure you that if you establish a dialogue with ping pong, even though you don't speak the language, you can understand a lot about your opponent during a match, how he reacts. It's a fantastic sport. So through the diplomacy of ping pong, they established new relations with China. They recognized People's Republic of China in the United Nations as a permanent member of the Security Council, and they had a special relationship with China at that moment. So the relations between Russia and China were not good. But now, after the collapse of Soviet Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization represents a new cooperation between Russia and China. So that is why we should consider how important was this organization. Also because this organization has some military aspect. They want to build military confidence. So they made maneuvers together in Central Asia. You can see also the area. The area is this one: Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and China. So they made maneuvers here in Central Asia to establish military confidence. This is very important nowadays for the Asian point of view. So we have to say that they had also as a goal to fight against terrorism, separatism. Why this is important? Separatism. Part of the country that would like to become independent. China has a problem, Russia has a problem. Russia has a problem with Chechnya. Maybe not only Chechnya. And China has problem with Tibet. Tibet. So they cooperate to avoid separatism, obviously, and extremism. Here you have the main principle, and we have also some observers: Mongolia, India, Pakistan, and Iran. Iran is an observer. Can today Russia and China be too strong against Iran? Difficult. They cooperate, they are neighbors. That is why you have to balance your policy. And you can read on the newspaper the different approach. United States, they have quite a stronger approach versus Iran concerning the nuclear proliferation. Russia and China, they are more moderate. This is also very important. Shall we see also some figures? What are the figures that we have nowadays on the growth of Asian countries? This is again a table that just came up from the last issues of the International Monetary Fund, the World Economic Outlook. It was published in April 2011, so 1 month ago. So we have the figures concerning 2010. The growth, Japan, we had almost 4%, Australia less than 3%. But then here we will go and see the newly industrialized Asian economies, the 4 tigers, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. But Hong Kong is part of China. Yes or no? No? Yes, it's part of China, even though we do still consider Hong Kong as a separate entity, because Hong Kong was a British protectorate before, until 1997. And then from 1997 became again part of China. But China kept it as an isolated entity because there was a different system in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is capitalistic system completely. So we also consider the data of Hong Kong as a separate entity. Big growth, Taiwan 10%, Singapore 14% in 2010. And China more than 10, India more than 10. You can see in Asia we have the biggest growth rate. Asia is the continent which is growing faster than other continents. You can see also what are the projections for 2011 and 2012. You can also have a look on the inflation rate. Look at India. It's quite relevant. Vietnam too. And here you have also the figures concerning unemployment. For some countries we do not have the figures. For instance, for India, and this is for China, unemployment at 4% is very low. Well, one of the targets of socialism is to provide job for everybody. Socialism provides job for everybody and a house for everybody. You laugh, but it's like this.
No, because here in Spain they try it and see the result.
Well, in Spain we do not have socialism, even if the PSOE is on the power. The PSOE is a socialist party, but we do not have a socialist system in Spain. In Spain we have a capitalistic system and an open democracy. In other countries, when we say socialism, means that we have a socialist system. With one-party system, everything is owned by the state. We don't have private property. And the state redistributes the richness in equal part without considering the merit. How much one worker deserves and how much another worker deserves. So this is interesting to see that now we do have also some unemployment in China, even though China is a socialist country. But as I told you before, China is also a capitalistic country, and this is extremely important. So here we have some figures, and also I can show you some figures concerning Russia and some of the Asian former Soviet republics, such as Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. So you can see the growth rate are considerable. Look at Turkmenistan, 9.2%. Look at Uzbekistan, 8.5%. So we do have considerable growth rate in Asia, even though sometimes, as you can see, the inflation rate is quite high in Mongolia, for instance, in Uzbekistan, and here you have the unemployment rate, which is still quite low, except, for instance, in Georgia, but for different political reasons. So here we also have some data concerning some oil exporters such as Iran. As you can see, the growth in Iran is very weak. Probably in 2011 we will have zero growth. And in other countries, Qatar is very strong, Saudi Arabia a bit more than 3%. Also Iraq is slowly restructuring, recovering, and we have all other oil exporters here. You can compare the figures in order to see how the country is going from the economic point of view. You know, when you consider how and where to make business, you will also have to consider the market, to study the market. If you study the market, if the market is pulling, yes or no, it depends also on the general economic framework. So always try to consider the trends. This table gives you an idea about the trends. Here you have some data concerning China, Japan and India. For instance, here you have the GDP. As you can see, China in 2010 is more than $5.7 trillion, which is the number 2 of the world, more than Japan. As you can see now, Japan is 5.4. And also India is growing, is more than $1.4 trillion. And here you have per capita. So if you consider per capita, then you see that China is very weak. You remember how much was the United States one? $45,000. And in China you have $4,000. So this is quite weak, but because China has a huge population. The population of China is 1.3 billion, India 1.2, and Japan is more than 100 million inhabitants. Here you also have the GDP per capita of Japan, which is much, much bigger than the others, as you can see, because Japan has a limited population, obviously. Okay, here you have more data. Maybe we can check a bit the one of Iran. Iran is also an interesting country. It has quite an interesting GDP, but also, as you can see, the GDP per capita is comparable to the one of China. And okay, here you have data also of Israel, Lebanon and other countries that we may analyze later, but most of those countries are not Asian countries, they are African countries, and we will consider that later. And here you have other countries such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, you can see also Taiwan. As you can see, Taiwan, in Taiwan, look at Qatar. The GDP per capita of Qatar is much more than the one of the United States. It's more than $74,000. And here you have also United Arab Emirates is more than United States. It's $47,000. So you can see and compare how those countries are growing and which is the proportion of richness that has been produced by those countries in the last years. Okay. Now we go to a conclusion on China. I would like to say 5 more minutes a bit about China today. As I told you, China is representing quite an interesting country because there is an incoherence. On one side we had an economic development that led to strong relations with capitalistic world. And even China is to be considered as a capitalistic country. You can invest in China, you can produce in China, you can buy in China, you can sell in China. Everybody is going to China because there is a boom of China nowadays. So China represents a good market. If you cannot sell your product here, you may go to China and probably you will find someone there. They have 1.3 billion inhabitants, so at least a couple of buyers you will find there and you will sell. So even China is representing a chance for delocalization. Delocalization means that I close my company here and I reopen my company in China. Why? Well, because the manpower in China is much cheaper than here. So I can produce there, and since I need that market to sell, I'm already in China, so I will sell directly in China. Good opportunity. But do I have restrictions because of the political system? Which restrictions? Yeah, of course. If I go there, I hire Chinese workers. And then, my question is, if I make money in China, do I have the chance to bring back my money in Europe? Or shall I reinvest my money on the Chinese market? What is the Communist Party of China requiring?
Probably make you invest a certain percentage, right?
Pardon?
They probably make you invest a certain percentage of your earnings.
Of course.
Yeah.
But also, if I go in China and I sell, so if I sell, I get money in China. I put this money in the bank in China. Then can I transfer this money to my bank in Italy or in Spain or in France? Probably not. Probably yes, under some circumstances. Of course, the Chinese power hope that we will reinvest this money in China. But if we are capitalists, we should be free to do whatever we like with our money. If I want to reinvest the money that I got in China, I want to reinvest it in Peru, I should be able to transfer my money in Peru. This is not clear. This is not clear. We can, but under some circumstances, and not the whole quantity of money, but part of the money. So we consider that as a restriction. But we had, very often we had, restrictions in the financial market. Also in Europe we had restrictions. We cannot export our capitals in other European countries before. We had limits. Now we are liberalizing everything because we want to make one common market in Europe. There should be free circulation of capitals, goods, services and workers. Then we have the political development, and we have still one-party system, socialism. So, do we have transition period in China? I say yes, because they are becoming more and more capitalist. But China has to resolve the question of possible internal institutional incoherence. Socialism and capitalism. That provoked also the collapse of Soviet Union before. How Hong Kong and Taiwan represent a problem for Beijing. How to completely integrate Hong Kong in the Chinese system, but Hong Kong is completely capitalist. Which control the Communist Party of China will do on Hong Kong. And Taiwan, shall we have a sort of reunification of the two Chinas as we had the reunification of the two Germanys before? Maybe, but Taiwan is democratic and capitalist. Will they accept Taiwan as Taiwan is? Not easy problem. So nowadays, ladies and gentlemen, Europe is, and not only Europe, but I would say the whole world is aiming to have good partnership with China. But there is a big question mark for the future, how China will provide guarantees for the system. And China seems to be very stable, but because there is a control of the socialist system. You remember we had the Olympic Games in China. Some leaders, they were anxious about that. There will be a big success, or it will be a failure. It was a big success. Security, no terrorist attack. There was a problem of pollution. China is highly polluted. Is China also advanced in the protection of the environment? The free energy? The green? How advanced are the Chinese in this? Maybe they You will see in Shanghai, in Beijing. Please observe everything, and you will write to me. Comment on China today. But China is representing one of the most interesting countries, together with India. India is also booming. But India is another problem. In China, we do have also the control of birth. In India, we don't. So India will be the most populated country of the world in few years. How to control the population in India is one of the problems. And also in India, we have big gap. Some rich citizen and a lot of poor citizen. Okay. I would like to end this part on Asia and China by saying that China represents a very good opportunity for business nowadays under some circumstances, and you have to study what are the circumstances. How to cope with the government, how to cope with the rules, how strict are the rules, how rigid is the system, and how open is really the system. You will check this during your visit to China. Now I propose a 5 minutes of pause, and we will start in about approximately 5 minutes, and we will go to another area to continue our analysis of the international environment. Thank you for your attention, and let's meet in 5 minutes. Okay? Thank you.